The road was quiet in the way it only gets after midnight, when traffic thins and the city feels like it is holding its breath. Streetlights passed in slow intervals as David Carter drove home, hands resting lightly on the wheel, his mind already moving ahead to the next morning. It had been a long day, and he was looking forward to nothing more than sleep. He had taken this route hundreds of times before. There was nothing unusual about his speed, his car, or the way he drove. That was why the flashing lights in his rearview mirror felt slightly unreal at first, like a reflection from somewhere else. David slowed immediately and pulled over. He turned off the engine, lowered the window, and waited, already reaching for his wallet and identification. The officer approached with measured steps, flashlight cutting through the darkness inside the car. His voice was firm, professional, and distant, the way routine sounds when it has been repeated too many times. David responded politely, answering questions before they were fully asked. When the officer requested identification, David handed over his license, along with a second card. He explained evenly and without emphasis who he was and where he was coming from. His tone carried no defensiveness, only clarity. The officer glanced at the cards briefly, then looked back at David with a narrowed expression. He asked David to step out of the vehicle. There was no explanation offered, and David did not ask for one. Outside the car, the night air felt colder. Passing vehicles slowed slightly as they went by, curiosity flickering and then disappearing. David stood where he was told, hands visible, posture relaxed. The officer asked questions that did not seem to lead anywhere. Where he lived, what he did, why he was out so late. David answered each one without irritation, even when they began to circle back on themselves. When David mentioned his profession again, the officer let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. It was not loud or cruel, just dismissive enough to land. He said something about people saying all kinds of things. David did not respond to that. He knew from experience that credibility, once dismissed, was rarely restored through explanation. He focused instead on staying composed, on not giving the moment more than it already demanded. The officer told him to place his hands behind his back. There was no accusation spoken aloud, no clear reason offered. David complied without resistance, the metal of the cuffs cool against his wrists. The humiliation was quiet, but it was complete. Not because of the cuffs themselves, but because of how unnecessary they felt. David stared at the road ahead, grounding himself in the small details. The sound of tires passing, the distant hum of the city. Time stretched. Backup arrived. Conversations happened just out of his hearing. His identification was checked again, then again. Eventually, the cuffs were removed. The officer said he was free to go, his tone unchanged from when he had first arrived. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of inconvenience, just procedure closing in on itself. David drove home in silence. The house was dark when he arrived, the night undisturbed by what had just happened. He slept, but not deeply. The next day, life resumed its shape. Meetings, responsibilities, people depending on him to be steady and present. He did not tell anyone what had happened, not because it wasn't worth mentioning, but because it would change nothing. Several weeks passed. Late one afternoon, David was called unexpectedly into a situation that required immediate attention. It was not dramatic at first, just urgent in the way crises often begin. Someone needed help, and there was no one else available. When he arrived, the atmosphere had shifted. The room carried a tension that came from fear rather than anger. A man stood near the wall, pale and rigid, his confidence stripped down to something fragile. David did not recognize him immediately. The man's posture was different now, shoulders drawn inward, hands clenched together. Authority had drained from him, replaced by something raw and human. The man looked up when David entered. Their eyes met briefly, then moved away. There was no sign of recognition yet, only desperation. David listened carefully as the situation was explained. He asked questions, calm and direct, focusing entirely on what needed to be done. The past did not enter his voice. As the moments passed, realization slowly dawned on the man. His face changed, confusion giving way to recognition. He stared at David longer this time, searching his memory. When it came together, it landed silently. There was no gasp, no sudden movement, just a subtle shift, as though the ground beneath him had changed without warning. David saw it, but did not acknowledge it. He did not pause or alter his tone. Whatever power existed between them now lay entirely in restraint. The man tried to speak, then stopped. Words seemed inadequate, and perhaps they were. He nodded instead, stepping back, allowing David to do what he had come to do. The situation resolved without spectacle. Help was given, professionally and completely. No corners were cut, no grudges surfaced. When it was over, the room felt different. Relief replaced fear, but something heavier lingered underneath. The man stood quietly, unsure of what to say. David gathered his things and prepared to leave. As he did, the man finally spoke, his voice low and uncertain. He said David's name. David turned. He listened, expression neutral, attentive. The man began to apologize, but the words tangled and fell short. David did not interrupt him, but he did not offer reassurance either. He simply nodded once, acknowledging the moment without absorbing it. Then he left. Later that night, David sat alone, thinking not about what had been said, but about what had been revealed. How easily authority could blind someone to humanity. How quickly certainty dissolved when power shifted. There were no headlines, no public reckoning, no sense of victory. Only the quiet understanding that dignity, once exercised, leaves a mark that punishment never could. And somewhere inside that understanding, a truth settled gently but firmly into place. Power does not prove who we are. It only reveals what we do when we no longer have it.